The Warrior in the Woods, as recorded by Glinda Goodwitch. There was once a village on the edge of a lush forest, known far and wide as the safest place in the land. The evil creatures of Grimm had not attacked there since long before anyone could remember, and it was said that the woods themselves protected the people from harm. As long as no one dared to enter the charmed forest, it would keep the monsters at bay. The people went about their days with carefree spirits, and the village gradually grew as more people arrived to live in peace. Over time, the people grew complacent in their ways, taking their fortune for granted and trusting they would always be safe and happy. The village children began playing games inside the woods, though they never ventured too far. After all, they'd never even seen a Grimm outside a storybook. One day, a boy was playing hide and seek with his friends in the woods. He ventured farther inside than ever before, farther than anyone would ever think to look for him. He waited and waited, alone in the gloomy forest. As night fell, the boy heard the woods come alive with the sounds of flapping wings, skittering insects, and rustling leaves. But he had never been afraid of the dark before, and he had always been curious about the forest. So instead of returning home to a hot meal and a warm fire, he wandered deeper into the trees. The boy soon found his way into a moonlit clearing, and there something found him. He first saw its 4 glowing red eyes, then the stark white of its long, sharp, curved tusks. This was the largest creature the boy had ever seen, and its pitch-black hair was seemingly made of the night itself. He screamed. The boy couldn't help it, for he had never seen anything like the Grimm. For the first time in his life, he knew fear, and he felt sure he was about to die. The creature whirled on him, fixed the boy in its burning gaze, and charged. The boy froze, throwing his arms up in front of him and squeezing his eyes shut. But then, as he braced for the worst, something shoved him aside. He tumbled away through loose dirt, stones, and leaves, and when he looked up, he saw a tall, fair woman in a flowing black cape facing off against the Grimm. She gripped a long-handled billhook with both hands. The boy was stunned to see the boar-like Grimm turn to run away from her. The woman charged after it, her bladed staff spinning so fast that it blurred. Just before she caught up to the Grimm, the woman planted the butt end of the weapon into the earth and vaulted feet first into the air. As she soared over the creature, she turned in mid-air, sweeping the hooked blade down and slicing through the Grimm. It squealed and split in two. When the woman landed, she pivoted to face the Grimm again, but the broken pieces only puffed into thick black smoke and floated away. She spun the billhook once more and holstered it on her back. "Go home. You never saw me," she told the boy, turning to leave. The boy jumped up. "Wait," he said. His ankle was sprained, but he hobbled after the woman, grimacing. She paused and looked back, and that was the first time he truly saw her. She was as beautiful as she was fierce. Up close, he saw her black cloak was threadbare, its hem tattered, tears throughout it mended with fraying red thread. Her loose gray blouse might have been white once, and her leggings were covered in mismatched patches. Her hair was almost as dark as the Grimm's, white hair standing out as brightly as bone. The metal hook on her weapon was chipped, and a crack was beginning to split the long wooden handle. "Thank you," he said simply. She nodded and continued to move away. "At least tell me your name," he called after her, but she disappeared into the trees. The boy limped home. He didn't tell anyone about the warrior woman who had saved him, but he described the terrible monster he had narrowly escaped. Those who believed him took his safe return as proof that the woods protected them, and they continued living as they had. But the boy had seen the truth, so he watched the woods with caution, always remembering the woman. And he wondered, who was she? And why had she saved him? Was it she that kept the whole village safe? A year later, the boy returned to the clearing in the woods, and then he dared to go beyond it. Even during the day, it was dark amid the trees, and after some time, he realized he was being followed. A sense of dread overcame him, and when he looked over his shoulder, he saw two bright yellow eyes flaring in the shadows. He drew a dagger from his belt and only faltered when the creature crashed through the trees and howled before him. This Grim had a gruesome, bony mask, and it was sharp all over. Sharp teeth, sharp spikes, sharp claws. It bounded toward him on four massive paws, its hind legs built for speed and power. The boy raised his dagger, but it was almost as useless as if he had been unarmed. He didn't cry out or try to run away. He was frozen in place by fear. Just then, he saw the woman drop from a tree onto the creature's back and hack at its neck with her billhook. Its handle was shorter now, and the boy saw she carried a sharpened stake made from its other broken half. When the Grim tried to shake her off, she jammed the stake into one of its eyes. Then she jumped off and watched as the terrible, dark wolf toppled backward and dissolved into a cloud of mist. She retrieved the stake, its tip steaming. "Thank you," the boy said, finding his voice. She turned to him. "You again?" She shook her head and walked away. The boy felt an unexpected rush of joy. "You remember me?" "I remember everyone I've saved, and everyone I didn't." She paused to look at him. "I see you didn't learn your lesson about coming into my woods." He held up the dagger. "I came prepared." Her laugh was not unkind. "So you're a slow learner. Don't come back. Really." "I came looking for you," he admitted. She narrowed her eyes. "I don't train people to fight anymore." "It's not that. I brought you something." The boy pulled off his backpack and held it out to her. She hesitated before coming closer to take it. She wasn't as tall as she had seemed before, and there were more white strands in her hair, but she was still proud and strong, and even more beautiful than he remembered. "What's this?" she said, as she pulled out a bundle wrapped in dark green cloth. Inside the bundle, there were 3 blouses like her own, 2 leggings, a black skirt, new boots, and a short, hooded green cloak. "New clothes," he said. "Well, not new, really. They were my mother's." Her brief smile faded. "Did she die?" the warrior asked. The boy shook his head. "No, she's fine," he said. "She doesn't wear these anymore. She told me to donate them to someone who needs them, and that's what I'm doing." The warrior said, "I need nothing, and I can't accept these anyway." "Why not? It's the least I can do." "The least you could do is leave and never come back." "Please," he said. "All right, if it will make you leave me alone." She wrapped up the clothes, nodded at him, and walked away with his gift. "Next time you enter the woods, you're on your own." When the boy returned the following year, he was now a young man. He moved quietly through the trees, almost as quietly as the warrior woman. So he avoided any encounters with Grim until he had nearly reached the center of the forest. Leaves rustled over his head as he paused to refresh himself in a shallow stream. Then he looked up to see 3 oversized, fearsome black owls fixing him in their deadly stare. They spread their wings, revealing razor-sharp feathers and deadly talons. The boy drew a long, thin sword, which he had forged himself under the dubious eye of the village blacksmith, who wondered why anyone would hunt with such a weapon when they could use a bow, an arrow, or a spear. But the boy had crafted his sword with a special purpose, to fight the hate-filled monsters from his nightmares. The savage bird creatures dived at him, attacking with claws and thundering away with their powerful wings. While he had hoped for the warrior woman to appear, he did not expect it, and indeed, she did not come to save him. It was a long, clumsy, bloody battle, but eventually the young man prevailed over 2 of the beasts. The third swooped at him. Exhausted, he couldn't bring up his sword in time. Then, a brilliant white light flooded the woods. He shielded his eyes, and when the brightness faded, the grim was gone. A moment later, the warrior woman appeared. "What was that light? Where did it go?" he asked. "You're developing a bad habit," she said. He sheathed his sword and grinned. Was it just wishful thinking, or was she happy to see him? She was wearing a clean white blouse with a black skirt, sturdy boots, and a dark green cloak. Her hair was pulled back into a ponytail. She held her shortened billhook, the end of the broken handle crisscrossed with red ribbon. "I knew you'd come to my rescue," he said. "Thank you." "For what?" "I didn't do anything." "Didn't you?" He raised an eyebrow. "You were nearby, at least. I told you I wouldn't save you this time," she said. "Fortunately, you did pretty well on your own." "Then thanks for watching over me yet again. Not just today, but always. Thanks for protecting all of us for all these years. Without anyone knowing, you're responsible for our safety. Why do you keep coming back here?" He looked into her eyes. She snorted. "Don't tell me you're in love with me." He blushed. "I brought you food." He offered his backpack to her once more. "I have food." But she opened the bag and pulled out parcel after parcel. There was honey cake and strawberry tart and sweet biscuits. When she unwrapped a stack of fresh-baked cookies, her expression lightened, and her happiness made him happy. She popped a cookie into her mouth and chewed. "I haven't had anything like this in a long time." She stared at the delicacies spread out around her. He got up to leave as she began her feast. "Don't come back," she mumbled after him, her mouth full. "I know," he said. But of course the young man came back, a year to the day later. This time, he made it all the way to the center of the woods, where he found a homely hut and the warrior woman waiting for him outside it, at a small table with 2 seats, 2 cups, and a steaming pot of tea. "Now what do you want?" she asked. "I was just in the neighborhood and thought I would stop by. Didn't see any Grimm this time. I cleared them all out of the area this morning," she stretched. "They'll be back. They always come back. But we have some time. Some time is all we need." He set down the weapons he carried, a new, better-fashioned sword and a gleaming new billhook with a long, sturdy handle. He sat down across from her as she poured tea into his cup. "2 weapons?" she observed. "You came over-prepared this time." "I made the billhook for you." He glanced at the one leaning up against her door, rope wrapped around the base of the curved blade to hold it into the handle. "That one has seen better days." "So have I." She sipped her tea. "Why do you keep coming here and giving me gifts every year?" "You know," he said, "to thank you." "You've already done that. No need to keep coming back for that. You've saved me each time we've met, and maybe more times besides. And I know that you've saved all of us." She didn't say a word. He put down his teacup. "May I ask you a question?" "Ah," she sighed. "Go ahead and ask. I don't promise an answer." "Nothing is promised in life," he said. "You've grown up a good deal since I first saw you." "I had to," he said. "My question is, why? Why do you live in the woods alone? Why do you risk your life to save strangers? Why do you protect the village? Why this village?" "That's 5 questions." Her shoulders slumped. "But they all have the same answer." Her voice was soft and sad when she replied. "I live here alone because I am alone. And as a general rule, I don't like people. Most of my own people were killed long ago. My family, everyone I've ever known is dead. And if there are other survivors like me, they're scattered all over Remnant." "Killed by Grimm?" She scowled. "Murdered by other humans." "Oh." The young man grasped his cup with both hands so the tea would warm them. "But then, why do you protect the others?" She looked at him steadily. "Because I can. Because no one else will. She smiled. And because some people are good, like you, and that gives me hope. She stood, hefted the bill hook appreciatively, and walked toward her hut. Finish your tea and then go, she said. But he had more to say. You spent all these years looking after us, he explained. I thought maybe it would be nice if someone looked after you for a change. He stood to leave. Because that's what I can do. Because no one else will. She smiled. Don't come back, she said. But they both knew, by now, that he would. Over the next year, the village expanded right up to the perimeter of the forest. Then the people went into the forest and chopped down trees and built more houses. So the village grew while the forest shrank. That was the year that the Grimm returned, attacking with more and more frequency and ferocity. People said that the village had broken its promise with the woods. Others suggested that, with too many people, there were too many emotions, and that had brought the Grimm back. But one man knew that the Grimm had always been there, out of sight and out of mind, because the village was protected by a brave warrior. He waited until the appointed day for his annual visit, worried about what he might discover. It was a non-stop fight to get to her home. He dispatched wave after wave of Grimm. He paused at each place that he had encountered the woman on his previous visits, and waited. But she never appeared. Finally, he reached her hut. The bladed staff he had made her was waiting by their entrance, as though she had just stepped away for a moment. But the door was missing, torn off its hinges. The interior was wrecked, whether by man or beast, he couldn't tell. It had been abandoned for a while. The warrior woman was gone. He shouldered the warrior's billhook and fought his way back to the village. Soon, the people would have to leave and settle somewhere else, without their guardian. The woods had become too dangerous. But until that day, he would do his best to protect them in her place. Because he could. Because no one else would. Back in the village, around a fire that couldn't quite warm him, he told the people the woman's story, so they would always know who they had to thank for the many good days they'd enjoyed. I wish I could have been there for her.
Someone's calling you.
I know.
Daddy.
I know, he said slowly. The way she was there for us. If she was dead, she'd had died alone. Why didn't you keep going back there year after year? A village woman asked him. Because she saved you? For that reason and for many more, he said slowly. But I believe she knew the deepest reason of all. The group waited. He gazed into the fire. I fell in love with her the moment I saw her silver eyes.